We talked about it last week. The Pennsylvania ruling, which says that they're now going to not count a ballot if it's not properly dated on the outside of the envelope. If I've misunderstood Marc Elias, his argument is that the date on the outside of an envelope is absolutely irrelevant. It's dated elsewhere. And why would that be a measure by which to accept or disqualify a ballot? The argument sounds compelling, but to the extent that I know I can't trust a word that Marc Elias says, flesh it out as to whether or not he's oversimplifying or just grotesquely misleading.
Yeah, well, there's two problems with his analysis. One is that's what the legislature agreed to. The second thing where he's being misleading, what all of these cases that we'll be talking about tonight have in common, is they want to be able to pad the ballot box with constitutionally questionable ballots because of either who is voting, how they're voting, or how the vote is being counted and canvassed. They want 2020-like rules and environment where basically the rules set by the legislative branch, who is the constitutionally authorized branch for presidential elections, that they eviscerated and ignored those rules in 2020 in all the key swing states and many other states as well. This time around, they're not having as much success convincing those legislative branches or executive offices or judges to either rewrite the rules or ignore the existing rules. They do so in the name of, oh, we just want to protect this nice, honest old person that's trying to vote that, by golly, just can't figure out how to fill out a ballot, and simplify it so that their ballot doesn't get thrown away and suppressed because of overly strict enforcement by those counters and canvassers. That's what the Democratic messaging has been now for 4 years. The problem is they needed to convince legislatures of those changes rather than circumvent those in an unconstitutional manner like they did in 2020. In 2024, they're finding less sympathetic executive branches, less sympathetic judicial branches, and more resistant advocates on the other side in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. The reason for the rule is simple. They want to make sure it matches up. That with a mail-in ballot, you have extraordinary opportunity for fraud. You don't get to see the person show up themselves to fill out the ballot. You don't see them walk by themselves alone and in secret to fill out the ballot. You don't see them return the ballot. So your ability to know whether that person is a constitutionally qualified voter is in doubt. So when they're casting a ballot in a way other than in person, then there's massive risk of fraud. There's risk of the person that's casting the ballot that isn't their choice for the ballot. There's risk that they didn't ask for the ballot. There's risk that they're not the ones who returned the ballot. They're not the ones who filled out the ballot, or their ballot was blackmailed or coerced or bribed, or that someone else cast their ballot on their behalf without their knowledge. All of these little rules, as Marc Elias calls them, are designed to make sure that's an actually constitutionally qualified voter casting their ballot. You can find people like Marc Elias and others in August of 2012 in the New York Times when they thought Romney's campaign was going to barrage the ballot box with mail-in balloting, identifying all of these risks of mail-in balloting and how it's a fraud. These were all the same liberal professors, liberal legal scholars, liberal legal jurists, and liberal legal press that now pretend that any questioning of mail-in balloting is an effort to suppress or steal votes. With the issues now in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, it wasn't because they suddenly discovered their nobility, because it's not a court notorious or known for their nobility. They overturned the Commonwealth Court, which assigned very questionable jurists. This is the same Commonwealth Court that on Tuesday, October 8th, in Allegheny County Courthouse is going to be hearing the government's latest effort to try to shut down Amish farmer Amos Miller. That's who this Commonwealth Court is. They were overturned because on procedural grounds that they decided to short circuit the process to jump into election matter that they didn't have legal authority to do. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, I think, doesn't want to be in the middle of as much election controversy as they were eagerly so in 2020. That's what's behind it. The same as in Michigan. And there's two different issues. One is who's on the voter rolls, whether the people on those voter rolls are constitutionally qualified. And the other is how do we make sure that the person voting is actually a constitutionally qualified voter who cast their ballot in a constitutionally qualified way. We got to make sure the counting and the canvassing of the ballot strictly enforces rules governing the method and mode of ballot casting and being on the registered voter list in the first place. In Arizona, after many insisted there was no problem with non-citizens being on the voter rolls, they suddenly discover there's about 100,000 people who never provided proof of citizenship on the voter rolls. There's been continuing issues about new registrations and whether they have to provide proof of citizenship. In Michigan, the Secretary of State there has been trying to find every creative way possible to liberalize and not apply and enforce the legislature's rules governing mail-in balloting, which is now expanded in Michigan after various election laws they passed over the past 8 years. There's these protocols in place, like you can use a stub system that has a number that matches up certain things that make sure the ballot is, in fact, that person's ballot. Make sure they're the ones who filled it out. Make sure they're the ones who are constitutionally qualified. And the Secretary of State's trying to not enforce the signature match standard, not enforce Dropbox restrictions, not enforce these stub numbering systems. That's why Republicans have to keep suing there and is remove the barriers to fraud by removing the detections for fraud, by removing the strict enforcement of the legislature's rules governing how a constitutionally qualified person can vote in the first place and cast that vote. Similar in Arizona, we've had mixed decisions. Arizona Supreme Court says leave the 100,000 or so on the voter rolls. It's a clerical error. That's the mistake. I thought that never happened. Garrett Archer down there in Arizona, media's election expert, said that never happens. And then he's turning around and acting like it's totally normal. When he gets caught lying again, he suddenly turns around and says, oh, no, this is just a loophole. It's been here for a long time. Everybody knows this. Well, that's not Arizona's defense. Arizona's defense before the Arizona Supreme Court was it was a clerical error. A couple of days before, Garrett was insisting no such administrative errors ever take place in the election context. Those aligned with the Democratic side are doing everything possible to be able to flood the ballot box with dubious ballots, either by people who are not constitutionally qualified to vote, who you cannot trust are the person who actually cast that ballot because they didn't cast it in a constitutionally qualified manner. They want to prevent all the fraud detection signals.
Speaking of Michigan, RFK Jr. taking it to the Court of Appeals to get his name removed from the ballot. That he'll be on the ballot for November, correct? Because there's not even enough time right now. Even if the appeals court decides to hear it, to forget the cost, to reprint all of the ballots.
They can do something. Whether they will or not is up in the air. It's just further expose the selectivity when they try to keep him off the ballot or try to force him on the ballot is representative of what a scam our ballot election laws are and the way in which they need to be reformed and remedied. I don't think in the end it will make much difference on the actual election day.
No, the people are not
the kind of shenanigans they're capable of.
To steelman it, the federal court said, we're not hearing you, RFK, because you're not coming to the federal court with what a state court already adjudicated. The state court 4-3 based on partisan lines says, no, there's not enough time. It's going to cost $500,000 to reprint the ballots. I would imagine RFK would pony up the $500,000 just to do it, given the millions he's already spent on litigation. All a load of crap. They fought to keep him off, then they fought to keep him on when they think it's going to be prejudicial to Trump.
What they've done over the years with election laws is, in the name of protecting the secrecy and anonymity of the ballot, the state has monopolized the printing and publishing of the ballot. That was not common to the founding. You didn't have the state being the sole source of ballot printing until the early 20th century. And it never had anything to do with ballot secrecy or anonymity. It had everything to do with stripping power from political machines that had a populist bent, that were often fueled by support from immigrant and other working class communities, and populist movement, which peaked strongly between post-Civil War period, late 1880s, and the early 1900s. What they've done is they've enhanced on that. They increasingly create rules that then justify the rules. And then they create a new set of rules for those rules that justify the other rules. Oh, we have to print these ballots so early. When it means replacing Biden's name with Harris, suddenly Biden cost of printing the ballot's not a problem. No issue there. Okay, Kennedy can't remove his name from the ballot. Then how did Michigan remove Biden's name from the ballot under the same rules? That they can't explain these. They're just complete hypocrites and frauds. Nothing exposes the political prejudice and the insider bias of both state and federal judges than ballot access law.
Tell me if this is the last one, but coming out of Georgia, the news, it's not in the court system, it's in I forget who the people are that vote on the rules for the election, but they're voting for, again, control the terminology, control at least the public perception. It's not hand counting or hand verification of each ballot. It's just hand counting the number of ballots cast to the number of votes cast to make sure that they are commensurate or that they equate. And everybody's saying, well, this is going to delay the results, as if you have to go through each one by one and meticulously analyze it. This is not a case of the little woodpecker signature verification in Arizona. This is just count the number of ballots versus the number of votes to make sure that they are equal and that there's no problems. And people are throwing a conniption fit out of Georgia, saying this is going to delay the results. Others saying it's also going to get overturned or reversed by a court if it ever gets to litigation. What is going on in Georgia? Is it a real risk that it is meaningfully going to delay the results?
I mean, this explanation of delay makes no sense. How can the entire world count their ballots on election night except the United States of America? This is something that the Garrett Archers of the world and the others, they can't explain. It's like, oh, now it'll be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It'll be so long. There'll be delays. This will lead to lack of confidence in an election. Why? Well, why can't you adequately staff up and adequately have personnel equipped to count this on election night like every other country in the world? It's another excuse. Their excuse is, oh, if we discount any ballot by strictly enforcing the rules, then we're suppressing the vote and denying someone their ballot. If we strictly follow the rules, it will be incurably and interminably delayed, and this will lead to lack of confidence in the election. Do they think 2020 was a banner example of confidence in presidential elections?
Just to highlight the hypocrisy, they're the ones who talk about the red mirage. It's going to take maybe weeks to determine that the Republicans aren't going to win, despite what it seems on election night. And then all of a sudden, they start talking about delays going to compromise integrity. If Canada can do it the day of with ID and paper ballot, California can do it in one night. If California can do it in one night, every single bloody state in America can do it in one night.
Florida never has a problem. But Florida doesn't have the problem everyone else does. What Garrett Archer can't explain is why can Florida do it so much quicker and better than our Arizona? I know they're his buddies and pals, but he can't explain that, nor can any of these other Democrats explain it. It's obvious what they're doing, but they're so used to spinning the narrative to rally their base and get buy-in from corrupted politicians that they don't expect anybody to see through it. Everybody sees through it. They saw through it in 2020, but they really see through it now. You're not going to convince anybody of this nonsense. Ultimately, they are way behind where they were in 2020. They're losing more of these suits than they're winning. All kinds of states are summarily, on their own accord, double checking the registration rolls to make sure they match and purging people that don't fit, whether it's Texas, Oklahoma, or other states.